my screenwriting friends. My name is Jeff Ballo, and this is the Feedback Loop. What we're going to do every week in this series is I'm going to show you screenwriting from the producer's perspective. Each week, we're going to take a look at a new script from a writer, maybe your pages. We're going to look at the first 3 pages of that script, and I'm going to review them, analyze them, look at them from the producer's perspective. So what is the reader thinking as they're reading through your pages? What kind of thoughts are going through the producer's mind as they determine whether or not to continue reading, whether or not to reach out and connect with you and actually say yes to the project? It is my belief that if you come back to the show week after week after week and you start seeing different writers' work and the analyses and the walkthrough that we do on each of the projects, it's going to gradually start to click why the vast majority of screenplays don't end up connecting with the producer or production company, even if the ideas are good, even if the writing is good, even if there's something within it that we can grab and hold on to. I want to show you what kinds of things work and what kind of things don't work, and maybe why those things that don't work are not really connecting, so that you'll gradually start to see how to turn your writing into something that actually makes sense and creates that picture and draws the reader into your story. My goal, my overriding goal has always been to help you write better material and actually connect with the producers and production companies who are out there who are absolutely desperate to find great material that we simply can't find. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at 3 script pages from a Scottish writer by the name of Eddie McFadden. Eddie, he's on the session, and we're going to go through 3 pages from a script called Clara. And we'll talk about what ideas he's putting into the reader's head, and I'm going to show you what those pages look like from the producer's perspective. Then we're going to follow that up today with an analysis of the first 3 pages of the Oscar-nominated screenplay Logan. This is an action script as well, so I wanted to show you how the screenwriters really pull the reader into their story. Now, the Logan script actually does something that I'm going to recommend against new writers doing for reasons that I'm going to explain, but it will also show you different ways that you can approach the same challenge and maybe create something that actually connects with the reader. So without further ado, let's take a look at Eddie McFadden's pages today, and I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, so fade in, exterior construction site, night. A portable construction light flickers. Beth Alloway, 30s, usually cool and calm under pressure, but right now is not that fucking time. Leans back against a thick timber post, exhausted, covered in mud. Her trembling right hand holds a .22 caliber handgun. She places her left hand on top of the gun, steady. Nearby footsteps scuttle over concrete. Beth flicks off her gun's safety catch. The footsteps get closer and closer, then stop. The light flickers more urgently. Beth steps out from behind the timber post. She raises her gun, takes aim, and the lights go out. 3 weeks earlier, Isle of Clara, Outer Hebrides. Exterior cliffs, night. Hurricane weather. Violent surf breaks against the rocks of the shoreline. A wind turbine is battered by the elements. Sparks flash against the turbine's whirring blades. Smoke swirls from its motor like a Catherine wheel. Interior, exterior, police car moving. Windscreen wipers fight against driving rain. Headlights illuminate a no trespassing sign, snared in the mauled wired mesh that was once a fence. A police car passes through the dilapidated iron gates. Exterior oil terminal, night. The plant is a metal shell of rust and nail. An oil tank's faded insignia reads Sure Oil. The police car parks up. Sergeant Ruth Alloway, 40s, forever curious and capable, steps out of the car and looks around. Ruth's POV. A classic Ford Cortina MK2 sits in front of the main building, headlights on and motor running. Ruth marches over to the Cortina, peers inside, and checks the driver's door. It's locked. She hears a hissing sound coming from a storehouse at the side of the building. Thick smoke escapes from the storehouse. Its doors swing in the storm. Interior storehouse, night. At the back of the storehouse, a small generator burns. Ruth spots an ancient fire extinguisher. She twists on her gloves and pulls the extinguisher from the wall. Ruth shoots foam into the flames. The fire subsides. Exterior terminal yard, night. She hears running footsteps. Ruth scans the yard. The Cortina's headlights dazzle in the rain. Its motor continues to tick over. She peeks around the side of the storehouse, sees no one. Her personal radio beeps. Ruth, into the radio. Ray, do you read me? Ray. Ruth checks her taser gun, her baton, and her pepper spray. She edges toward the main building. Exterior main building, night. A makeshift barrier of corrugated iron blocks the entrance. Ruth wrestles the iron sheet aside and enters. Lobby. Ruth waves her flashlight over the deserted lobby. She hears the sound of water dripping from the ceiling and falling rain against corrugated iron. She negotiates debris scattered across the lobby floor, the eerie sound of a door swinging on its hinges. Bang! Ruth spins, then freezes on the spot. A door slam? Footsteps again. This is the police. Identify yourself, says Ruth. She draws her taser gun. Ruth steps forward and is enveloped by darkness. The door continues to squeak and squeak. Suddenly, a flash, followed by the sound of rapid gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. Exterior terminal yard, night. Army boots stomp across the rain-soaked yard and stop next to the Cortina. Black leather gloves at the driver's door. We don't see their face, but someone climbs into the Cortina and closes the door. The car's tires pull away over the gravel. Its headlights sweep past Ruth's empty patrol car. Interior main building lobby, night. The flashlight shines across the desolate lobby, and somewhere in the dark, Ruth's radio continues to beep. Okay, so those are the pages that we're going to talk about today. So the first thing that I wanted to say about these pages today are we're obviously starting with an action sequence. So it's obviously an action opener. It's a way to try to pull the reader into something exciting is happening. We don't know what. The problem that we have with these pages today is that we don't know what's going on, and there's not really anything specific to pull us into this scene, right? So what's happening in this situation? One of the things we do see is we see that there's Beth Alloway in her 30s, and then a couple of scenes later we meet Ruth. Where is she? She's buried in the bottom of the text here. Sergeant Ruth Alloway, 40s. So presumably related, presumably maybe sisters, maybe cousins. Don't know yet. But we also don't see. We also don't see a link between who they are, right? So the first challenge we have is, let's think about this first scene here. She's on the construction site. It's nighttime. The light's flickering. I like this introduction, usually cool and calm under pressure, but right now is not that fucking time. Even though that took me like 2 reads to go, wait, what is he saying here? I like the general idea of it. I think it needs to be smoothed out a little bit. But she's leaning against a post. She's exhausted, covered in mud. You have a lot of images that are unfolding one after the other, but it's not really, there's nothing for us to hang on to, right? There's nothing for us to, we don't really know what's happening. Okay, so think about the logistics of this scene. We meet her, we have sort of a detail, we have another stray detail. She's holding a gun, but is it her gun? Is it, it's not clear, which is okay if you want to pull us into the story in a way that's unclear. But at the same time, we also have to be clear on what's the drama that's unfolding. So all we're seeing really right now, overall, she's on a construction site. She's hearing footsteps. She goes to aim her gun, and the lights go out, which is fine, but it's not as dramatic as the way that you're writing it. Does that make sense? So the way you're writing is you're pulling us through this action scene, but we're not really clear on what it is. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so far?
So far.
The main challenge is this is your intro, right? So now you're going to say 3 weeks earlier. So we're doing this major sort of reverse time jump, But in order for this really to work, in order for us to go 3 weeks earlier, this needs to have something happen. I don't know what the drama of the story is that's going to unfold, but let's imagine she, I don't know, finds a severed head or something. Like, you know what I mean? She like something major has to happen here that gives us a real pow moment, and then we take that breath, and the 3 weeks later is going to pull us in, or 3 weeks earlier is going to pull us in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So three
Yeah.
weeks earlier, we go to this island, these cliffs, and we're again into sort of this slightly staccato description of imagery, right? So it's sort of like image, 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 which is cool, but they're not really adding up. So we're not really seeing how the images are coming together to form a clear picture of what the of what's going on here. So think of it this way. At the end of this page, what do I know? Like, what do I know, and why do I know that I should keep reading? We don't really know all that much. We know she's in a construction site. We know there's a car pulling up to an old building, and there's bad weather going on. That's sort of all that we know, right? It's written in a way that's trying to make it maybe more compelling
Right.
than it is at the moment, which is fine. All we're going to really need to do is make sure that we have more content, that we have more plot, we have more story within it, because the description's fine. It can pull us in. And I'm going to ask you to maybe mix it up a little bit more so that it's not the same sort of style throughout, because we can start to fade as we're reading it. So let me give an example.
Okay.
So let's just start with this bit here. So hurricane weather, violent surf breaks against the rocks of the shoreline. A wind turbine is battered by the elements. There's no real reason for these to be three different paragraphs here, right? You could probably say the same thing in like one sentence, really. And in that way, you paint that picture more quickly. And because we're not if we were saying new things with each of those paragraphs, fair enough. Like if each one of those new paragraphs was a new insight or a new pulls us further into the plot, fair enough. But if you look at the content of these three lines, right, we're not really adding to the story. We're just sort of stretching out the description. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It does.
That's the challenge that we often have in this kind of a situation, because you want to pull them through and build the tension, but we have to make sure that we're always saying something. We always have to make sure that we're painting a picture. The whole first page, the reader's trying to figure out what's going on. Why do I care? My phone's ringing. There's 10 other scripts on the thing. Why am I going to keep reading this and stop reading that? And just interesting description isn't really enough, right? I need to know what's happening. So when we jump into here, we introduce Ruth. So she's the police. That could probably be highlighted a little bit more strongly. So that it's clear.
It's a police car.
What's that?
Just a bit clearer that it's a police car on
Well,
the page.
so the thing is, here's the thing. It's all the issue always is context, right? So yes, you have the police car, and I would say you say parks up. Is that a Scottish phrase?
Yeah, it's kind of a UK.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just what I wrote, I think.
No, that's fine. Because in America we would say pulls up, right? So,
Okay.
but again, it depends on where you're trying to sell. So if you're aiming for the UK market and parks up is a very common phrase, then of course you're going to want parks up. So, but my point is, you have this on a separate line, so it does highlight the fact that it's police, but I would, because of the fact that the way you've written this, right, where it's a new line for not each element of the story, but each sentence of the plot, right? Like each sentence of the description. Um,
Mhm.
I, what's happening is as I read it, my brain is thinking, here are six new things I need to know, right? Each thing, and you're highlighting it. You're putting it on its own line. So it's like hurricane weather, super important. Okay. Violent surf breaks against the rocks of the shoreline, super important. Why? I can't, my brain doesn't know why exactly, but okay. A wind turbine is battered by the elements, super important. Do you understand what I mean? Like, because of the way it's laid out, my brain is thinking each thing is important. So by the time I see the police car pulls up, in context, where each line is done that way, this is just now, by this point, I know these are not each super important. So police car parks up doesn't seem super important now at that point either. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does.
Okay. Um, so the challenge is it could be, always remember that people when they're reading their script are going to be skimming your script, or they're going
Yeah.
to be trying to read it quickly. So she gets buried in here. Her introduction gets a little buried. Whereas if you sort of just went police car, just its own in all caps, right? Its own line, and then like do the next sentence of like screeches in whatever, right? Ruth
Okay.
Holloway sergeant pulls out, steps out, whatever. Like we make a more of a grand entrance for her, then we're not going to miss her in the context of what we're doing here. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so we're hearing the she sees the car, she hears the hissing sound, there's a fire, she goes in, um, nobody's there. Do you see what I'm saying, where it's not quite clear on what we're following? So let me ask you this: what's going on here? Here, let me.
Okay. Um, what I was trying to do, the I haven't actually looked at these pages
For
for
a
a
long
little
time.
while. Oh,
Okay.
okay. So I'm actually just going back to this screenplay to try and rewrite it. So this session is actually ideal. I didn't realize how busy it looked because I'm actually looking at it with you. It looks really quite busy on the page. But to go back to your question, what I was trying to do was actually tell the audience or the reader that this is a thriller, and I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to make it a little bit scary
Mm-hmm.
and them with some active questions. The initial part, what I think I wanted to do was really be like one of those old film noir movies, like Mildred Pierce, start with a quick grabber, and then
Mm-hmm.
that scene, the initial scene, we go back to on page like 85 in
Mm-hmm.
a more full context, so you actually get to know what it's all about. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's maybe not the right place to put it at the start. I don't know.
No, that's a not only a perfectly valid way to start a story. It's probably the best way to start a lot of kinds of stories, right?
Oh,
The key though is that we're going to need to make sure that something happens there that makes us
yeah,
want to know. So the way that kind of a situation works is you get to the end of the story and now you have all this greater context. So when you rewatch that initial scene, you now see all the other forces at play in that scene, right? Now, let
yeah,
me ask you,
yeah.
in light of that, based on this story that you've written, what are we going to see in that first, can you guys read it? In that first like teaser, what are we going to see that we're not seeing this first time, or what's the greater context that's going to add that dimension
Oh,
of meaning to it?
okay, there is a kind of showdown that on the construction site,
Okay.
and she finds out that someone who she wasn't who's quite close to her happens to be involved in this mystery,
Mm-hmm.
and that first scene actually is actually quite an extended action scene. Comes a proper battle with guns and hammers and people getting chased and violence and things.
Okay.
Uh, um, sorry.
Well,
Yeah. So
let me, but think of it a different way. So
yeah.
you're saying that we're going to come back to this scene and we're going to see this scene from a new vantage point, and we're going to have a more clarity on what this is, right? So I guess
Yeah.
what's the added drama that we'll see the second time on this scene?
Yeah, it's a good point. It was just for the audience to know that it was coming back here, and
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, and she realizes this person is involved in this killing or mystery,
Yep.
and yeah,
Okay, so it sounds like what you're aiming for here is to have that initial moment that builds up to this really tense, dramatic, like cliffhanger type moment, and that when we
yeah,
come back to this moment, it's still going to build up to that cliffhanger moment, but we're now going to understand who she is and where she's at
the
and what
full
that means.
context of it. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
so in order for that to work, then
right,
this scene is going to have to build to an actual crescendo, right? So
yeah,
so all that's really happening here is that she's trembling, she aims her gun and the lights go out, right? So
right,
it's not it's fine, but in order to grab us on page one, and it might be fine for your story. Obviously, I don't know the whole story, so I don't know the larger context. But just in principle, as I read this for the first time through, I'm looking for what is that heightened dramatic moment. And in general, I would argue that pretty much all screenwriting, all stories, we really want to zero in on what's the most dramatic aspect of this moment, of this scene, of these characters, lives, etc. Does that make sense?
yes, it does.
So don't just use it as a gimmick, I guess. I,
Okay.
I see that quite often, actually, where people are, maybe using a nonlinear storyline, or they're, calling up scenes from other parts of the story, what have you. And it's done for interest, or it's done to be clever, but it's not really done to tell this story in its most effective way. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So as long as you're not using it, if you think that way of not using it as a gimmick or as a narrative device, but think of it as how can I extract maximum audience emotion out of this, right? How can I pull the audience in? Then what's going to happen is not only is the device going to work, but it's actually going to be the best possible way to draw them into the story, right? So it's the best way to tell this particular project. If you take out the gimmick and put in the purpose, the reason, the greater drama, the greater narrative drama. Yeah? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah. It does. It makes sense.
Okay, so then the other thing is when you go from this and then you go to 3 weeks earlier, the challenge always of going to 3
Yeah.
weeks earlier is that we need to have 3 weeks earlier is going to have to explain what we just saw. The reason we're going to go 3 weeks earlier is like, hey, here's the story that sets up what you just saw. We're going to make that assumption when we see 3 weeks earlier. We may go to a part of the story that has nothing to do with that. There's lots of different ways to play around with that device, but that's where the reader's brain is going to go. So if I don't have a specific, hook to hang my thinking on at that point, then when I go to 3 weeks earlier, I'm like, did I miss something? Right? So then the challenge of that becomes then you start reading the next bit a little bit off step. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
So then we have to be really clear on setup. So let me ask you this about the exterior cliffs scene here.
Yeah.
You're highlighting each of those lines. Is there what's is there a specific reason for it, or is just sort of it's just sort of the way you've unfolded it?
No, there is a specific reason. The whole context with the
Hmm.
weather and the oil terminal is really important to the story because there was the shore oil. This actually controlled, in terms of the story, shore oil actually owned most of the island, but they have rerouted their pipelines to Europe, and a new age or a new earth energy company sees an opportunity to move in and buy up some land. So that's really important to the actual plot overall. Okay, so what I was actually trying to do, I guess, and was probably get that sort of idea in there right away. And I was probably writing that, Jeff, more or less for myself, if you know what I mean. I was
Yeah.
trying to get, okay, this is the weather's important too, the story and the history with shore oil on the island is actually important to the story. And all that may or may not be involved, mixed up with Sergeant Ruth Alloway's murder or shooting. So,
S- So
it's
you're
probably, I do appreciate what you're saying that
well. So you're saying that she's about to get murdered. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, because she's sort of checking out the Cortina car, and then she there's the distraction with the storehouse, and I think I was just trying to sort of kind of make a nice little correction of scenes to build up some tension, where she
Hmm.
goes into the main building and she hears the noise with the door squeaking and everything, and she knows someone's there, and the audience knows someone is there,
Hmm.
and then there's gunshots, and then we're left on the sort of active question as the driver pulls away in the Cortina car, who is this guy or this who is this person, and why is this shooting taking place? So it
Okay.
is actually kind of okay. Sorry.
No. Okay. So where it's bang bang bang. That's actually
Yeah,
her getting shot.
yeah,
Okay. All
yeah,
right. So there's a number of things to unpack in all this, but she steps forward and is enveloped by darkness. The door continues to squeak and squeak. Suddenly, a flash followed by the sound of rapid gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. Um,
yeah.
we don't necessarily know that it's not her shooting, right? Or someone like there's no way for us to know that she's the one that gets hit. You want that? That's intentional, right there,
Yeah, it
or
was, yeah, because the next cut is to the army boots stomping across the yard, and there's the gloves on the Cortina driver's door. So we don't see
okay.
the driver, they get in the car, and then they pull away across, and it's
Hmm.
like the deliberate was the car drives past her police patrol car. So we know whoever is in the car, the white Cortina car, is responsible for the gunshots, probably. And then it
Okay.
cuts to her flashlight, which she was using earlier on, and it's just the image of the flashlight on the floor, and then the sound of her radio in the background somewhere. Then it cuts into the main story, really, or the main character, which is
Okay.
Beth.
So this is one of those situations where I feel like there's probably more here than the reader's going to get, right?
Yeah,
So everything that you've described sounds like a perfectly fine way to start up a story like this. So the
right.
challenge in part is that the way you're pulling us into it, you're throwing images at us that in our mind don't necessarily add up to the picture that you see in your mind, right? And this is one of the biggest challenges of creative writing in general.
Yeah.
So don't fret about this. This is the lifelong struggle to learn how to do. But the way that I always like to put it is I refer to this thing called image order. I've talked about it in the previous sessions or whatever. It's about always remember that the reader's a blank canvas, right? So every word you write is going to put a picture in their head, and that picture is going to make them anticipate other pictures. And then the other things that you write either serve and flesh out and build and expand that picture, or it gets further and further off the mark of what they were expecting it to be, or it doesn't jibe, right? So, and it's not just in the words you choose, it's also in how you lay those words out on the page.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So as I've been saying with those sentences, right? So we have that all kind of throughout here. So in general, what we want to do is, what's the most important thing for them to understand? In its most simplified version, it's this cop pulling up to this abandoned old oil terminal, which is what, like a pumping station, they're pulling oil out of the ground, or it's a refinery, or what is it? Oil terminal.
It's more like oil storage place.
Okay, so like big barrels of oil, that kind of a thing, or like
tanks, yeah, big oil tanks, yeah.
And big oil tanks. Okay. So I feel like what we probably need to do is the thing that I think you're probably going to want to do is the first things first. So if you want to go and improve these pages, right? The first thing we want to do is make sure that teaser has some big thing in it, right? Something that becomes a hook, something unusual, something unexpected, some danger situation. And I don't know what the climax of your story is, where this actually goes from here. So, it may need an element that's not currently in your story, or it may need something, or you may need to reveal something that is there that's cool, that's a good sort of twist, or the setup for the twist, and introduce that early on. But something that's going to hook us, like, whoa, this is weird. This is a tense little thing. That's what's going to need to happen here. Then here, the most important thing is making sure that we see that the cop gets killed. We see that the shadow figure gets away in the cortina, and we really establish that this is a dilapidated old oil factory, right? Those are the main points to get across, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Everything that you write needs to serve that, needs to pull us into that story, that world. Don't get carried away with unnecessary description. If the weather is important, that's fine, but it's going to be better to paint the picture quickly, because all we really need to do is go, torrential rain pours down on a dilapidated old oil storage unit. And then that's it, right? So you mentioned tension, and you wanted to build up the tension of the thing. The only way that the reader is going to feel or experience tension is if they care about the people in the story who are experiencing the tension. So this first scene, I say this as respectfully as I can, doesn't have any tension to it. Not because it couldn't, but because we don't know who Beth is, and we don't, you haven't given us a reason to care yet. So what the old adage is, make the character really good at something, make the character really funny, put them in peril, right? So you think she's put in peril, but that's really what the whole end of the thing is. Right? We don't really know she's in peril. So by the time we experience this, there's no tension here, right? So just sort of describing the scene or the situation isn't gonna give us that sense of tension. So we want to always make sure that we're writing about characters in a situation. Like that's almost the dominant or the predominant purpose behind the writing. Characters first, situation second, in order of importance, right? We can set this little world, but if we don't know who the character is and what the situation is, it doesn't matter how nicely described it is, it's not going to work for us. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Cool. And I'm probably going to say, does that make sense? A lot, but that's just my way of, so I'm sure it does. um, so yeah, so I think there's possibility here. I think there's certainly the potential if you want to go and sort of tighten it up or simplify it. And the other thing to understand is if you do what I'm describing and you make those 3 pages much simpler, and you pull us into who the character is and what the situation is more clearly, you're going to have a lot more time in these 3 pages to give us more more interesting
Yeah.
situation or detail, right? So, yeah, I mean, you know what I mean. So rather
Yeah.
than sort of all this, do that in 1 paragraph, and then you have more time to for those details that
Yeah.
make us go, oh, what's this? Now, the only other thing that I wanted to say was just writing style. Um, be aware of, this sounds like a silly thing, but be aware of when each paragraph has sort of the same look and size, right? So this is 1 line, this is 1 line, this is half a line, this is 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, half, 1, 2, 1. You know what I mean? So the problem is it gets visually repetitive, so it that will contribute to the reader missing details. So I probably read these pages 3 times before it fully hit me, before I fully understood. And your detail's there. It's not like
Okay.
this is confusing, but if it's not, you'll notice that when we watch movies or TV or watch YouTube videos today, everything's like cut, 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 right? Why is that? That's because it's our brain gets bored really quickly. And so when we see something that's visually repetitive, we fade, unless what's in that is rich and compelling, and the detail within that one frame. You watch something like 3 Billboards or something like that. You watch a movie like that, and it's fat. Just the little facial gestures on Frances McDormand's face they speak volumes. And so we don't need to cut because there's enough there. We got to make
Yeah.
sure there's enough there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
no, it was just it's been a little while since I've really read over these pages, and I'm quite um, surprised how busy they look.
How what? How
Busy.
how
They look
busy?
busy. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I had to, just as a little confession, I had been reading, I think, a little bit too influenced by a Walter Hill script I read called The Driver.
Mm-hmm.
He did a lot of, in that particular screenplay, a lot of his scenes are almost like little lists of like sentences. And I think that's sort of crept into what I've been
Right.
doing here. So there's definitely something like that going on. But yeah,
What
absolutely agree. I'm using up far too much real estate on the page with
with
unnecessary
with
description.
unnecessary detail? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We ultimately want to have literally every single word, really, but at least every single sentence be
Yeah.
absolutely crucial and add to the story, right? So it's not just about describing, right? So like a novelist can take, a chapter just to describe the sensation of swimming or something, right? Like it doesn't necessarily pull the story forward, but just the description of it pulls the reader in, and we get into that headspace. Movies are different, right?
Yeah.
Screenplays are all about just tell us what we need to know to understand the picture we're watching.
Yeah, sure, sure.
And then and I would say like decorate it, paint it a little bit for flourish, right? For just to make those ideas visceral and tangible and palpable.
Yeah, give it a
Yeah,
little
which
twist.
you've got some of that in here. So I like I said, I really like that. I really like this initial introduction. There's a I almost feel like, yeah, I almost feel like this is it needs to be its own sentence or something. There's something in it that jumbles the read when you read it the first time. You know, yeah, I'll tell you what it is. We're seeing her. We're describing her. Fine. We're seeing her in this moment, but then we're finishing up the action that she's doing right now.
Yeah,
right?
okay. Yeah, so the description's in with what she's doing at that moment. Yeah.
Well, so it's basically like four or five things we're trying to grasp in one fluid sentence, and so it makes the sentence not fluid.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Cool. All right. So is there anything else you wanted to sort of talk about or ask or discuss on these pages?
No, thank you. Like I say, it's I'm really going to get to work in the next month or two on rewriting. I have a draft. I have a sort of first draft. I actually sent it off to. It wasn't really ready, but obviously, but I sent it off to Blue Cat screenplay competition because you get notes. And they gave me some good feedback. A lot of like in terms of the story, they quite enjoyed the plot and stuff like that. They weren't in depth in terms of about my formatting or description, but they found the plot quite engaging and stuff. The main sort of feedback they gave me in terms of the overall screenplay was that my main character didn't get going quick enough. She's a journalist, but she doesn't really start to hit her prime until about halfway through the script. And I think that was because I had quite a lot of plot to set up, and I think she got a little bit lost in the first half of it. But I didn't feel awful. The good thing about Blue Cat is I think you can rewrite your script and resubmit it. So hopefully try and do that in the next month or two, mate. So get to work on it.
Sure. Well, what I would like to do with the show as well is, if you end up rewriting these pages, or if you want to rewrite these pages, what I do want to do as we move along with this is maybe have another look at the pages, sort of at the end of a future episode. So
you mean when it's rewritten?
Yeah, if you want to do that, and then we can sort of, knowing what this was, we can go back and revisit those 3 pages and get a sense of it.
Yeah, be up for that.
Cool. So that's and that's sort of anyone who's watching or anyone who's wants to send in pages to get reviewed for this. Same thing. So I'd be happy to, I guess, loop through the feedback and sort of use that as a way to help you improve and see if we can address some of those specific points that we talked about. So that is open to you if you want to do it.
Cool.
All right. So let me. I'm going to thank you very much, by the way, Eddie. I appreciate that. It's always you're always putting yourself out there when you're putting your words on the screen for other people to review and potentially.
Thanks for your feedback.
No worries. So I'm going to switch you back to an attendee. So hopefully this makes sense to everybody. Does anybody have any specific questions about those pages or about what we talked about in that? What I also want to do is introduce a new sort of feature to this, where I want to go over maybe the first 3 pages of some existing scripts that are maybe well regarded. So to that end, because Eddie wrote an action thriller sort of thing, I wanted to read the first 3 pages to you from the script Logan, which was actually nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, I believe. Is it original or adapted? Anyway, I think it was an adapted screenplay. It's the Wolverine. It's the Wolverine thing. But in doing this, my hope is to help you see how someone introduces a lot of information and a lot of insight into what's happening in a scene and pulls you into that itself. So before we do that, Debbie has asked a question. Let's see. You asked Eddie, why do we care about the cop who gets killed? What would help achieve that? Would something as easy as a line of dialogue help, i.e. she's on her cell and says something interesting? Possibly. just something to make her real, or alternately, a little more action, like Shane Black does in page 1 of Lethal Weapon, on page 1 just before the girl jumps out of the window. There's possibly that as well. Having us care about what's happening to the character on page 1 can be a little bit difficult because we haven't really had a chance yet to meet them, to know about them. But if the first thing that we see a character doing, or they're in a situation that we can see that it matters to them at least, then we're going to have more empathy for that character. If we see that they're good at something, or maybe in a situation that's out of their depth, and there's something about the way they're handling it that is engaging. So if somebody, I don't want to say you want to make every character funny, because you don't. But as an example, let's imagine a character is on page 1 thrust into a situation that they can't handle, and they make a sort of joke about how they're not going to make it through this because this is ridiculously challenging. Like right away we're going to care about them, right? Because right away they're a likable character. Right away they're somebody we can relate to. So when a character is out of their depth and there's a reason why they care about it, we'll care about it too. If it's just a character in some sort of, think about a horror film where you've got the character going into the woods, or the character creeping along the hallway at night and there's strange noises coming from the other. We don't really care. They're usually an expendable character in the beginning of a horror film just to set up the horror genre thing, right? So why are they expendable? Because we don't know them, we don't care about them, nothing's happened yet to make us interested in them. But if there's some scene right before that where the character's trying to get into college, or the character needs to, save up money for, bailing their mother out of jail, I don't know, whatever it might be, then we can care about that character in a more human way. Think about why you care about anybody. We care about people that we know. We care about people that whose future we're invested in. And so I'm not sure that you can always do that on page 1. The cop going in and getting killed, we're not necessarily going to care about the cop. But what we probably do need to care about in Eddie's pages is that first character on page 1, the character in the construction site, so the sister, presumably. We're going to want to know this character and care about this character right off the bat. So they're going to need to do something, or say something, or be something that pulls us in. Does that make sense? All right. Are there any other questions about this, or I'll go ahead and switch over to. I'm going to take a look at these pages from Logan and read these out. Sound good? All right. You guys with me? Not too many questions today. All right. So here's what we're going to look at today. Wait, hang on. Let's see. So Debbie's question is, did everyone but me recognize the two characters had the same last name in Eddie's script? Debbie, are you saying you didn't recognize that? Because I didn't recognize that the first time through. So keep in mind, I've read these a couple times through because I don't want to stumble as I read through them on these live sessions. But the notes that I'm giving are generally related to how I felt on the first read through, and then maybe additional notes and additional thoughts and ideas based on subsequent read throughs and whether it comes together or not. If something comes together on the second or third read through, that means it's not bad. It's got some things that are good about it. The detail is there. But always remember, when it comes to screenwriting, the reader has to understand what's going on and care the very first time they read your script. So I make a bunch of notes the first time I read through these, and I notice where I stumble, and I notice where I've tripped over the words, so that I can pinpoint where those problems are. If I'm reading a script for consideration, if I'm reading a script to think about sending off to somebody else, the first time through is the only time through, right? So if something is not clear the first time through, as I believe you're right about the two last names, then that's going to get missed. And that project will probably need to be rewritten or redeveloped or refined to make sure that it actually works. Sound good? All right. So let's have a look at the first 3 pages from the script Logan. This is an Oscar-nominated screenplay. So it's got a couple of things in this script that we're not going to do as first-time writers or as writers who are writing on spec. So there's a few little notes in here that we're going to talk about. So let's have a look at this. An LCD billboard with defective pixels. A beautiful couple dance on a giant can of a Red Bull-like drink, Hypno. The label morphs to different flavors. Exterior, a vacant lot night. Colored light from the billboard flickers over a bullet-riddled sign, Route 85, U.S. border, El Paso, Texas. Beneath the sign is a long black limousine. Cars whip past on the highway. Then a van passes, blasting some future version of techno-Latino hip-hop. A squeal of tires off screen. Now the music gets louder as the van returns, cruising slowly past the black limo before pulling into the lot. 5 bangers bail out and check out the black stretch. The limo doors are locked, windows tinted, so they can't see what's inside, but they check out the tires and wheels and like what they see. With the speed of a pit crew, they open the back of the van and out come tools and a jack. Interior, limo, same. We move over the back bench, past empty bottles, fast food wrappers, and a sleeping man's face ratchets into frame. He opens his red eyes. The man is Logan, a.k.a. the Wolverine, or more accurately, drunk Wolverine. He blinks, dazed, feeling the car lurching upward. Older than we've seen him, he clutches a tequila bottle. Exterior limo, El Paso highway turnout, night. As the back door opens, the tequila bottle drops to the dirt and a booted leg steps out. Logan shuffles, stiff, to the other side of the stretch where the bangers work, removing wheels lit by colored light. Logan, please stop, guys. Those are chrome-plated lugs. They all 5 turn. Some pull guns on the drunk limo driver. He just keeps talking, slurring some. Logan, you're going to strip him. Plating flakes off, you know. A jittery banger cocks his shotgun. First of all, notice on page 1, we already are right into the action. There's no excessive description. Literally everything that we've read so far is setting up this scene, this situation. We see the fullness of the scene. There's no confusion about what's going on. There's no confusion about who's who. Now, we do already know who Logan is from previous Wolverine movies, and they're about to do something that I'm going to very strongly recommend against you doing. But we have this picture. Even if we didn't know Wolverine, even if we didn't know Logan, we still understand what's going on here, right? A drunk guy in the back of a limo is getting his limo stripped. Logan, it's a lease, It's a lease, and no one wants to pay to ride in the jittery banger fires, blows Logan right off his feet. Logan, fuck. And now we have this bit. Let me just read it. Now might be a good time to talk about fights described in the next 100 or so pages. Basically, if you're on the make for a hyper-choreographed, gravity-defying, city-block-destroying CG fuckathon, this ain't your movie. In this flick, people will get hurt or killed when shit falls on them. They will get just as hurt or just as killed if they get hit with something big and heavy like, say, a car. Should anyone in our story have the misfortune to fall off a roof or out a window, they won't bounce. They will die. As for our hero with the so-called eternal life and healing, well, he's older now. If you keep reading, you'll discover Logan's about to get his ass kicked. But before we get to that, we should make it clear his abilities ain't what they were. Yes, he's a drunk, but he's also fading on the inside. Adamantium implants leaching into his system, causing chronic pain and diminished healing, hence booze as a painkiller. So by all means, go ahead and worry about him. Now, where were we? Oh yeah. As the smoke settles, a crowbar-toting banger angrily chews out jitters in Spanish for firing. The others resume their work, none aware of Logan slowly getting up. Till Logan, guys, seriously, gets to his feet. You don't want to do this. The bangers react to Logan with bafflement, ad-lib Spanish reactions, nervous chuckles. Crowbar presses down Jitter's gun as he moves to Logan. We hear a familiar snick as claws slowly extend from one of Logan's hands, then mostly extend from the other. Logan is still frowning at his bad hand when Crowbar thwacks his skull, a metallic ring. Off balance and pissed, Logan swings at them as they converge, but he's drunk and soon they are pounding him with knives and guns and fists and a torque wrench. He tries his best to keep them from the limo, catches one guy's bat an inch before it would dent the car. Another one of them shoots in that direction, but Logan puts himself in front of the bullet. The pain from that little move stops him long enough for them to resume the pummeling. Suddenly, Logan's eyes go yellow, pupils dilating. He lets out a long, loud yell. Fury rockets up in him like cocaine. He stands and rams his claws into Crowbar and kicks another banger into the back of the open van. Yet another runs at Logan only to get gored in the neck and tossed. This is real work for Logan, not easy, and it is fueled by rage. Jitters again raises his sawed-off. He will nail the car for sure, but Logan slices off his arm above the elbow. Sadly for Logan, the hand, while disconnected from the body it once belonged to, is still holding the gun. So as it hits the dirt, the gun goes off, putting several pellet-sized holes in the door of the limo. This, more than anything else, doubles Logan's anger. Who gets hit once more? And then goes after the last banger, seeing he had his chance, leaps into the van and spins out of the lot, his wounded compadre and back spilling onto the dirt as the van bounces back onto the road. Logan picks up his keys, some loose change, and a single silver bullet. He stands staring into the holes in his otherwise pristine stretch as rain begins to fall. He sucks in deep breaths, forcing himself to regain control. His eyes return to normalcy. The phone vibrates OS. Logan takes out his, looks at it, he's got a fare, kicks the jack from under the chassis. We crane up as Logan starts up the stretch and makes a loop in the lot, taking care to run over the three remaining bangers before laying rubber onto the highway. Main titles begin. Okay, so a couple things that we don't want to do in in a spec script. Now, keep in mind, this is, as we see here, the final shooting script. Final shooting script is going to have some possibly, it's usually going to have input from the director, from some of the crew perhaps. So you're often going to have things like camera angles. Generally speaking, it's not that you can't put camera angles in your script. It's that it's kind of the lazy way to do it, and you're telling the director how to do their job, which directors often don't like. So in general, in principle, we want to avoid that kind of a thing. But this is a final shooting script, so it's going to be a little different to an actual script. Now let's talk about this little writer talking to reader bit. This is Logan. So this is part of the Wolverine series. This is a sequel. This is a film in a franchise that already exists that is going to get made. This is written either on assignment or on spec by people who are connected to that world. This is not the kind of spec script that you are generally going to write if you're writing a script to try to subsequently sell it. So, while this kind of thing works in a Shane Black script, this kind of thing works in a Logan script, this kind of thing can work, but it's very, very risky. If you do this kind of an aside to the reader, you had better be able to back it up with something that is worthy of getting nominated for an Oscar. Okay? So in general, I'm going to recommend against it. Now, that said, the way these pages were done is all about helping the reader understand what's going on, helping the reader understand tone and style and detail, right? It's basically saying this isn't just another CG, people bounce off walls and nobody ever really gets hurt. This is the texture of this is going to be more real. Now, ideally, they should do that in the words that are written. They should do that. If you're going to do that in your script, you need to do that within the writing style, within the word choice, within the way you make the action play out. But these guys can get away with it. So this is the challenge also of looking at scripts that you find on the internet because and professional scripts and scripts of movies that you've seen. Oftentimes, you're not reading a spec version of the script. You're reading the final shooting script. Oftentimes, you're also reading something that writers may know the people who they're writing for, so they can put things into their script. If you're reading something from a writer-director, or somebody like Tarantino, they're going to write what they want because they know they're going to be the one directing it. They don't have to go out and try to pitch it or sell it, right? They do, but they have a proven track record, so they can get away with things. So as a new writer, as a spec writer, we want to make sure that it's your words, it's your imagery, it's the way you lay the plot out on the page and the way you pull the reader through the story. Now, that said, ultimately, if we look at these pages, those pages do it really well. So if you think about the words, this first page, there's no asides to the reader. This is, if you wrote a spec script and it had this kind of a start, that's a solid start. It's a great start. We go straight into, this is an action start. We see our character. We see our character being the underdog. We see other people trying to take advantage of him. We see him coming back at something. We see bullet holes in his pristine limo. We don't know why that's important, but we see that he reacts to it, so it's important in some way. Does it make sense? So we want to make sure that if you look at, I'm always talking about sort of white space and sort of when a reader opens up a page and it's got all this text on it, right? And they see the next page, oh, it's got all this text on it. Oh, the next page has got all this. There's a lot of reading in this script, right? But if I get into the first, 3 paragraphs and it's all beautifully visual and it's all pulling me into the story and I can tell this is going to be an entertaining read in its own right, I'm happy to read the big blocks of text. Does that make sense? So this is just an example of how a great action scene or how to start with an action opener or with something that's pulling us in with tension and with drama like that. I've got the script that the pages that I want to do in the next session are a lot lighter, and so I have another one of the Oscar scripts that I wanted to look at for that next week. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can see sort of where we're trying to go with it. Hopefully you can see hopefully you can see that at the end of the day, the goal with all screenwriting is to put that cinematic experience in the mind, in the imagination of the reader as they read the pages of your screenplay. If we can do that, then they're going to experience the movie. So it's not about painting a nice picture or using any sort of gimmicks along the way. What we really want to do is we want to think about sitting around a campfire, think about telling that story. We want to draw the reader in and we want to pull them through. So let's see, Metin asks, but even when you remove those comments to the reader, isn't the script very wordy, even though clear, which we wouldn't have the luxury of? No, so I think I kind of answered the question before I saw that you had asked it, Metin. But the point is not that you don't want to be wordy. The point is that you want every word you write to paint the picture quickly, efficiently, move the story forward, and give us the cinema experience. The thing about this first page of the Logan script is that's about a minute of screen time. We see the billboard with the flickering lights, we see the cars on the highway, we see the limo, we hear the music in the van pulls up, the guys jump out, they look at this limo, they go get all their stuff, they start, pulling things off it, and then we're inside the limo, we see him waking up in his daze, the alcohol or whatever it is, he sort of falls out the side of the thing, and we're right into the action. That's all that's in there on page 1, but it's written in such a way that you see that movie. And that's kind of the goal that we're trying to achieve here. So it doesn't necessarily mean there aren't sleeker, slimmer ways to convey the same thing. But there are a million ways. There's no right or wrong. I've said it before. I'll say it 1,000 times again. There is no right or wrong. There's no this is better than that. There's no there's no saying that they made the best choice or the right choice. They made a choice that was effective. They made a choice that worked. And as a result, it pulls us into the story. Now, because this is an action story needs to have action. So we're going to need to describe the action, which they do very well in that script. So we also want to always understand what we're writing. What's the genre we're writing? What's the audience for this? What is the audience expecting in this kind of story? An audience to a Logan movie is going to want to see clever, interesting action scenes. So we're going to need to make sure that we have those descriptions. And it's not just about describing the frame, right? It's really about describing the action within the frame. That's the goal that we're aiming for, is pulling the reader into the story and making them care about the story and the characters and what's happening to whom. Okay? All the sort of description of that, what the color of the curtains look like and all that kind of stuff, is not necessary. It's not relevant unless it is. Make sense? Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me have a quick look at the chat box to see if we have anything that we're missing. Let's see. Debbie says, I adore these pages, and no, I'm not Scott Frank, but the pages are clear and interesting. If we're constantly told to make our scripts great and that there are no rules, no right or wrong, then why can't we do our own version of rule breaking like this in our own script? Do you really think it is going to be a turnoff to you as a reader if the story is compelling, interesting, and well done? Would you absolutely have put down Logan if it were from me? No. And this is my point. My point is not that you can't do it. There are lots of scripts that do it, even from unknown writers. My point is that it's risky. What that does when you do the aside from the writer to the reader, not to the... Keep in mind, a screenplay is literally the cinema experience on the page. So when I read the script, it should be as though I'm watching the movie in the theater, in my mind, in my imagination, right? So any writer's aside, any little clever quip that the writer puts in there to the reader, you're not putting that on the movie. That's not going to that little block of text is not going to go in the movie itself. So because it's not going to go in the movie itself, you're pulling me out of the movie to give me this little writer's aside. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying that's really risky. I'm saying that if you can't pull that off, and you don't know for a fact you can pull that off, you have more a chance of pissing the reader off than you do of having the intended effect. That does not mean you can't do it. There are no rules. There really aren't. I've seen people get away with all sorts of stuff. The challenge that I always have, in particular when you try to teach this kind of stuff, is if I teach you the writer aside thing and then you go out and you misuse it, you piss off your reader, then ultimately I've led you astray, right? It's like camera directions. It's you will see lots and lots of scripts that say, we pan across whatever, or we zoom out to see or to reveal. These are directorial notes. These are details that don't actually belong in a script. But they can. It works. In a lot of cases, it's going to be the most effective way to paint the picture in the reader's mind. What I'm suggesting is that as a writer, your job is to paint the picture with words, not with gimmicky cheats, right? So if you can paint that picture with words, then I'm going to be double dazzled. So let me give you an example here. Let me jump back over to it because there's a great example right here, which I had thought of, but I didn't know if I was going to be able to to point out. So here you go. Let's see. Here you go. So exterior limo, El Paso highway turnout night. As the back door opens, The tequila bottle drops to the dirt and a booted leg steps out. I want you to think about that line for a second. We don't need to say close up on the boot hitting the dirt. Our mind is already imagining a low angle shot right at the dirt level where the boot drops into the frame, right? That's what our mind is imagining because of the word choice, right? So you don't have to use a camera angle. You don't have to describe something or do an aside to the reader here to let them know that that's what the picture is that you're seeing. You just describe it in a way that they have to see that camera angle because of the way you wrote those words. This is what I'm arguing is more. I would argue that that is going to be the mark of a better writer than the writer who says close on boot as it hits the dirt, right? Same thing, but one has a better way with words and the other one is using the cheat, which may, not always, but may annoy a director. Because if a director sees that shot, the writer's telling them how to shoot their story, right? And a lot of directors will go through and go, yep, I'm using a different shot than that. How can I reimagine this so that it's my vision and not the writer's vision? Now, a lot of directors are not going to do that, but there will be those that do. And so can we avoid that? If we can avoid that, I would argue that we should. As a writer, your job is to paint the picture with the words. And if you paint the picture with the words, then we usually won't need the kind of writer asides that are there. Sometimes you might want to have them there because they're fun or that's a kind of a funny inside joke. Be aware that they do pull the reader out of the story. Imagine you're watching a movie and you see a boom drop into the shot, right? Or you go past the storefront and you see the crew and the reflection in the window. What does it do? It pulls you right out of the movie. Whatever emotional investment you had in that scene, just spotting that, you see outside the frame. It's no longer this immersive experience in this story, right? It's suddenly you're aware of the movie making, which just that little bit can pull you out of the emotional experience of it. So if the next scene is supposed to build in crescendo, or maybe this scene is supposed to build in crescendo emotionally, you're not going to get there emotionally because you noticed that thing. That's why they do go to great pains to make sure that there's no booms in the shot or that there's no reflection of the camera crew. Similarly, in a screenplay, I would argue that we should go to the same lengths to make sure that we don't have those kinds of things that are going to pull the reader out of the story. Okay, so again, that said, you are free to do whatever you like. You're always free to make use of those kinds of techniques. Just make sure you can back it up. So, and I would argue that most writers can't. I would argue that most time in spec scripts, the spec scripts are the people that are trying to get noticed, right? So a lot of the scripts that you read of movies that have been made, the writer knew the director, the writer knew the producer, the writer's agents, the writer and the producer's agent were the same. So they've met at cocktail parties, blah, blah, blah. They might want to do those kinds of inside jokes or they might want to do things that they get away with because it's fun, because it entertains them while they're reading the script, whatever. It's a different reality to the writer trying to break in. It's a different reality to the writer trying to get noticed and say, hey, my story is awesome. My movie's cool. So hopefully that makes sense. Cool. All right. So are there any other questions about any of this stuff? Do you guys like the idea of reading an existing script? I don't mean for it to be a counterpoint to the other script because they're obviously two different scripts, totally different writers, totally different situations. So it's not about comparison. It's really about showing, it's really about helping you. I want to try to, through the course of the series, I want to try to help you see what works and what doesn't and why, and understand how readers read the scripts so that you understand what the reader's thinking as they're reading your words. it's really hard to see that objectively until someone else points it out to you. Eddie was talking about how he hasn't read the script in a little while, and so now he's looking at it now, and it looks really busy to him now. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see it objectively until you are watching me talk through it with other people watching me talk through it. You'll see your own work a whole lot more objectively after you've been through that. So if you do have pages that you want me to review in an upcoming session, please go ahead and click on the email link or whatever's on the website where you see this, and send some pages in, because I'm happy to review stuff, and my hope is to always be kind and considerate and helpful and productive to you. I'm not here to make anybody feel bad. I really want to help you make sure you generate the best possible story, because whatever story you've got in your head, whatever idea is going through your head, whatever picture you see, there's a reason you see it. There's a reason you care about it. There's a reason you want to share it. And because of that, I think it's important for you to share it, and I think it's important for you to make sure that you share it in the best possible way, so it has the best possible chance of actually connecting with a producer or production company who can ultimately help you turn it into a film. Make sense? So let me have a quick look through the chat and see if there's any questions that were on here. I don't think so. I think you guys are relatively quiet today. Kevin asked a question. Let's see. Hang on. Kevin says, could you maybe review a spec script that you've read in the past that you did make? Well, I haven't made one. I got sidelined by teaching screenwriting. So I've been trying to get writers to write material for me to produce. Not for me to produce, but there's this ethical issue. I can't teach you to write stuff for me. That's not very ethical. So I need to help you write something that you can sell anywhere. The challenge that I found over the years is that the difficulty of screenwriting is that literally everything is interconnected. So literally every word you write is connected to every other word in your script. And if you don't know how, then you don't quite see the connections completely yet. The reality of that is that there are, I would say, somewhere between 300 and 500 different skills you need to develop in order to do it effectively, fluidly, naturally, intuitively. That's what my screenwriting system's all about. That's what FAST is all about. Take you through the process where you develop the skills as you build your project and ultimately try to sell that project. But that's a difficult thing. Writers don't follow through, and writers don't quite absorb it all entirely. And sometimes we absorb it, but I see further down the road, okay, they're not quite getting this aspect of it or this, and so we go back and refine it. I started out trying to look for screenplays to produce. I started teaching screenwriting. That just became this bigger beast and animal than I ever thought it was going to be. And now cut to nearly 20 years later. And I've been teaching and building the system, and now starting something like this, all in the hopes that it will lead to and generate projects that we can produce. But there's so much to be taught and understood that it's kind of a full-time thing as it is. So my hope is, now that Fast Screenplay is built and done and completed, I want to do this, and my hope is to get into production later in the year. We'll see. We'll see how we go. So I can't necessarily do it from a spec script that I've read that I did make, but I am going to look at a, probably not next week, because I think I want to do a different project next week, but the week after, there's a spec script that I read that I fell in love with, that I would have made had it not already been optioned by someone else by the time that I read it, and then ultimately has turned into a movie. So it was a spec script that then got turned into a movie that was one of my favorite spec scripts I ever read, which I will do that in a couple of weeks for you. So you'll be able to see that. But then once you see the movie that was made out of it, you'll think that it's like a studio film. And it's the great thing about spec screenwriting is that literally if you write a great script and you really connect with the reader and you pull us in and you paint this world for us and you give us characters we care about in situations that are interesting that we want to see resolved, there's literally an infinite array of opportunity out there. There is so much opportunity. We can make movies anywhere on earth now. It's not just Hollywood anymore. There's literally thousands of movies made every single year now. This is a craft that takes a long time to learn and master and really do well. You're probably going to see why if you stick with me through this series and we go over a variety of scripts, because the problems are all similar but very different. But it does take a fair bit of time, but that time is well spent. There is enormous opportunity. There are a lot of people like me out there who are frustrated would-be or would have been producers who... I tell a story. I'm sorry, guys who've already heard this before, but I had this situation where I was in Sydney and I'd been teaching screenwriting through screenplay.com.au for a long time, and this guy contacted me from Singapore. He had a group of investors in Singapore. They had $10 million. They wanted to make 3 movies. So since I taught screenwriting, surely I had 3 screenplays ready to go. I didn't. Writers don't follow through. Writers don't take the stuff on board and actually do it. And I don't mean you guys, because you guys are here watching this. You guys are here participating in this. There's obviously a heightened sense of interest and passion for it. That's rare. I find that to be far more rare than you think. Everybody wants the get rich quick version of all this, right? I always say, do you want to write a screenplay? Or do you want to have written a screenplay? Do you want to have one on the shelf and be able to go, look what I did, but not actually do the work of doing it? Or do you actually like getting in there and making this stuff work? You have to do that. You have to like getting in there and making this stuff work. And you'd be surprised how hard that is to truly find. So I remain ever hopeful, ever optimistic, ever energetic. Maybe. You guys don't see me on my off moments when I'm writers. But I keep coming back for more, so there's a passion for it. My goal in the beginning was to start an independent film studio. And I think I'm answering Kevin specifically because I don't think you're not part of FAST, I don't think. My goal was to start an independent film studio, make 3 to 6 films a year. Started looking for screenplays in Australia to produce. There was, back in this is late 90s, early 2000s, there was no screenwriting culture there. I would argue there still isn't, but there was definitely none then. And couldn't find material, just couldn't find anything. Like nobody wrote. I talked to a producer who, at one of the producer conferences, who 2 years earlier, had the highest grossing movie of all time in Australia. And I asked him how many scripts he gets on spec for people to read. And he said, on average, maybe 2 a week. I said, are they any good? He's no. So it's like, even back when I started doing all this, it was a wasteland. I would argue it's not a whole lot better today, and I don't necessarily like to say that because I don't want to offend you guys who are, I know, putting in a lot of energy to do this stuff and to try to do it really well. But I say this to maybe emphasize and reiterate that there literally is unlimited opportunity. The challenge is that the barrier for entry, that level at which your project has to be is pretty high. And so, it's very obvious, hopefully we're going to see over the course of the series, it's very obvious very quickly that any number of things can cause someone to stop reading your script. And that's going to make it harder to sell and to get in there. And there's a lot of... my big challenge when I started teaching screenwriting was I was in Australia and there was no, everything was all about writing for Hollywood. All the educational stuff, all the stuff online. Well, there was no online back then, but it was all about writing for Hollywood. And you can't write a Hollywood script and make it in Australia. It's just not, it's a different market. There's different sensibilities, different budget levels, different audience interests. It's different, right? Same for you guys who are in different countries around the world. there's a huge market outside Hollywood, but you can't just write a Hollywood film and hope for it to work. It doesn't work that way. We have to tell localized stories, tell them in a maybe more effective way, more crowd pleasing way, etc. But that's the big challenge was, the people that were writing stuff in Australia were writing for Hollywood, which we couldn't really make in Australia. And, to sell to a big studio, nowadays it's got to be an action hero story. But there's a huge indie scene. There's a lot. Don't worry about making smaller movies. There are or personal character stories or whatever. There's literally hundreds, up to thousands of films made each year. Sundance Film Festival for the last 4 years or something has gotten an average of 4,000 feature film submissions every single year. Think about that. 4,000 feature film submissions to the Sundance Film Festival. Now, everyone sends their script into the Sundance, right? So a lot of those are probably not going to be very good. But that's a lot of submissions. That's a lot of people making a lot of movies. And while very few of them are going to see the light of day, all of them need a screenwriter, right? All of them start somewhere with maybe an amazing story on the page. And so my hope for you guys, my encouragement to you guys is that if you write that story that really does stand out, it's then just a matter of connecting. It's then just a matter of connecting with the appropriate producer, somebody who's suitable for it. And there's a whole thing about that, but we can get into that another day. So hopefully this makes sense. Didn't mean to go off on my little spiel about me at the end, but there are a couple of you guys who don't know me yet. So hopefully, does it make sense, Kevin? Is that a satisfying answer? Is it a lame answer? Do you hate that answer? I don't know. Anyway, Fernando, I hope you will deliver. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so that's about all we have for the session today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this raw session. I'm going to trim a few things down. I'm going to make it a little bit more sort of I guess viewer friendly, turn it into more like a TV show style looking thing. I mean, it's still me talking to camera and going over the pages, but put a couple little transitions in there and stuff like that. So I'm hoping to do each new session. By the way, before you guys go, if you want to join me for next week's session, there's the link to register. Hang on. So Fernando asked a question. Fernando asks, what would be some difference between a Hollywood film and, for example, an Australian film? My first thought is budget. Okay, so without going too far into it, yeah, the budget is a big thing. Consider this. Australia has around about 30 million people. The U.S. has around about 330 million people. So there's a bigger potential audience in the U.S., plus U.S. films have a big market all around the world. Australian films are kind of a niche product usually, so they can appeal to local Aussies. They don't always carry internationally. International audiences, for whatever reason, struggle with the accent, or just feels like it's not a mainstream Hollywood film. So a lot of Australian films get made with American accents, ironically. To try to appeal to that international market. So the challenge is if there's a smaller market for your film, then the budget's going to have to come down, right? The budget's going to have to be smaller correspondingly, because if you can't make $100 million film when there's only an upside possible of $5 million gross, right? So, but you could make a $1 million film or a $500,000 film with a $5 million potential gross. So what happens often is the Aussie films tend to be smaller budget, which tends to limit a lot of what you can do in the visual effects, which means that you tend to tell smaller stories, or not necessarily smaller, but more personal stories, more intimate stories, more real world stories, all that kind of thing. So So you don't usually have these big epic extravaganzas that you're going to see out of Hollywood, because Hollywood is uniquely positioned to do that because they have huge budgets for that. Now that said, I think Luc Besson did the most expensive sci-fi film Europe ever made independently last year or the year before, whatever it was. It didn't do very well, unfortunately, which is now bad for the rest of the indie film world. But it's possible, like the money can be pooled in other regions to make those bigger films. So, it really depends on those are the sort of budgetary issues. But then culturally as well, Australia is not America. I lived in Australia for Australia, New Zealand for almost 20 years, and Australia is very different to New Zealand. They're both very different to the U.S. So just because you can't just take an American film and make it in Australia, because there's a different sensibility, there's different cultural cues, there's different sense of humor, there's different ways the character probably go about solving their problems, just all sorts of things, right? If you think of, because Fernando, I think you're in Mexico, is that right? So if you think about a Mexican film, is that right? Yeah. If you think about a Mexican film, or the way sort of, the cultural heritage of Mexico, what that brings to the characters in the story, what that brings to the situation, it's obviously going to make characters do things different. There's a great example. I literally the other day just watched Coco, which, if you haven't watched Coco, that's this animated Pixar film, just won Best Animated Feature. Rightly so. Absolutely fantastic. And a lesson in storytelling. So you could study that film and see it's so beautiful from a storytelling standpoint. Dialogue, the characters, the situations, the twists, the reveals, all that stuff is it's fantastic. You really should watch it. But what I liked most about it, or what I found really interesting, was we're seeing sort of the Hollywood type of storytelling, but with the Mexican cultural storytelling, cultural sensitivities, and you're seeing the Mexican version of the Hollywood story, right? Which was, if you can look at a story like that and watch some other sort of American story, that might help you sort of see how those stories are somewhat different. So it's not just budget, but that is a very large thing to do with probably the defining difference in feature between the two countries. But it's also sort of the way things happen and how stories are told. If you were to write a Russian film, the Russians don't like happy endings in general. The movies that do better in Russia, historically anyway, have always had tragic or downbeat endings. There's something about the culture, they don't believe the happy ending, or they just don't respond to it. It doesn't feel authentic or real. So they tend to prefer the more ironic or tragic or twisty sort of endings. So you obviously you can sell a great film anywhere. A great story is a great story, but as far as the kinds of movies that get made, these are things to factor in as well. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded an answer, but all right. So anyway, you guys have any other questions? I'm happy to talk for a little bit longer if you like, but I don't want to keep you all day every day as well. So let me know. We're good? Are you guys all registered for the next session already? Anyway, Australia has its own film festival and screenwriters can submit their screenplays. Yes, that's true. Want more? Good stuff. Well, so yes. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this episode done as an episode properly in time, because I'm doing all the graphics and all that kind of. I've got my friend does all the music for The Amazing Race, and so he's doing the theme music for us. So I'm gonna have a little intro thing, but so I'm gonna try to get the show together as a show by maybe Thursday. But hopefully you guys can remember to join me. Also, it's on 3 p.m. 3 p. p.m. Tuesdays. So remember, if you're Los Angeles. So remember, if you're that we are shifting it, so it's going to be a little darker, probably 1 hour later. It's cloudy here today, so this is probably darker than it will normally be. But so we're going to start at 3 p.m. We'll go for an hour or hour and a half, something like that. I'm happy to go over, talk more, discuss these things. I may end up repeating myself from time to time, but there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of things to say in all this. And so hopefully you guys are liking this. Hopefully you guys are interested in continuing with it. Please, 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 please share this. Let other people know about this. It'll probably be good once I have this current episode up. So I'm going to try to do this by Thursday. But if you can share this, I'd like to get more people to attend these sessions. If you have script pages, please send them in. I do need stuff to review. We've got about, hang on. Let me see. I want to see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got about six scripts in the queue, so we're probably good for another month or so, and then we're going to need more scripts. So if you've written anything and you want to have it reviewed, be brave. It's all good. There's no judgment here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do these episodes. We're going to put them out live. So that the episode will go up on, I want to say Thursday. Hopefully it'll go up on Thursday. And then that episode will be up for a week. And then next week's episode will go up Thursday. And the episode from this week will go down. Now, what I'm going to do is build sort of like a membership area where you'll be able to access all the back episodes. So you can go back and review any of the stuff if there's something specific that you can do. But hopefully that way we can try to offset some of the costs of running this thing. So so that's the plan. Hopefully that sounds good. That's it for now. If you guys have nothing more to ask or talk about, there's no other... right as I say that. Fernando asks, does it make a difference to producers to send the script plus the art of the movie, for example, drawings, plus a 5 to 6 minute teaser of the movie? Does it have more of a chance to get made? And if it does, why? I might save this question for the next session, because I feel like we're going a little bit long now today, and that's there's a big question you've just asked. The short answer, like too long didn't read, TL semicolon DR, is don't do it. We don't, generally speaking, you want to send just the script. If it's an animation, you can often send some animation styles with it to give a sense of what it's supposed to look like, or at least what you have in mind for it. But always understand that the rest of the team is going to be making the movie, right? So the writer's job, now you may become the writer / some other job on the movie, but the writer's job is to write the movie. So we want to make sure that the script itself says all it needs to say. So we don't want to have fancy fonts on the front page. We don't want to have drawings in there. We don't want to have notes in the sidebars. We want the cinema experience on the page. So when we read that script, we see the movie in our imagination. Make sense? So that's the short answer. Remind me again next week. Maybe I'll go in a little bit more detail about that, if that's cool. Sound good? Okay. Hopefully that sounds good. All right. Good stuff. So we'll leave it at that. And I want to say thank you so much, guys, for joining me. Be sure to take action every day. Screenwriting is a craft, and as a craft, it takes time and it takes energy, and you just have to keep plugging away at it. So don't just think about it one day a week. Take action every day. Keep practicing, keep experiencing, keep moving forward, and have fun with it. There's no right or wrong. This is a creative exercise. Even if your script doesn't go anywhere, this is creative expression and creative outlet. If you have fun with it, that magic is going to come through onto the pages, and you'll probably get a little more traction than if you try to figure out the best way to make and sell something, right? So have fun, take action. We'll see you guys next week. And thanks again to Eddie.